Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. We thought what would be better than one Darren than two Darrens. So we've got me, Darren Curtis from Volcanic, and we've got Darren Wetherstall from Pager, who I'm sure many of you already know. During the course of this session, we're going to talk about things like job board spend, we're going to talk about effective source code tracking, and we're going to talk about personal branding and integrations. So hopefully there'll be some good takeaways, and it will be recorded at a later date anyway, recorded, and you'll be able to review it at a later date. So thank you very much for joining. So I suppose the first question that I've got, the first discussion point that I've got for Darren is really job board spend and why we feel that so many recruitment businesses are throwing candidates to the competition. So what's your take on this, Darren?
I mean, it's one of my biggest frustrations when I see people advertise jobs on paid job boards on the likes of social or on their website, because when you send traffic to your own website, it's a captive audience, and if they read that job and they think that's not quite right for me, their next action is to click on job search and find a different job that you're recruiting for. Now, that same action, if you do that on a job board, means they're going to find your competitors' roles. And if you think about the brand awareness piece, what we're trying to do is get people to be aware of our brand so that our sales activities are warmer, whether that's calling, whether that's emails. You want people to know your name. What you're actually doing is promoting the job board's name rather than your own. So I find it completely nuts, frustrating when I see that on social. I don't know about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, exactly the same. I think one of the things that really gets my goat, and I've seen a couple of websites that have done this, is where they say, look at our open roles, and then link out directly to a CV library page, or link out directly to a total jobs page. And essentially what you're doing then, if you are capturing traffic directly into your website or directly into your business, you're attracting candidates to your business where they haven't come from a job board. And then you're telling them to go off to CV library, where there are thousands of recruitment companies advertising for those jobs. You're actually at risk of losing that candidate.
Yeah, you've probably put the spend into bringing them into that journey. So you may be reaching them through Google ads, it might be your SEO, whatever it may be, but you've invested in your website, your marketing spend, and all you're doing is driving them to your competitors. It's absolutely nuts. So if there's one thing, a key takeaway today is if your job section on your website isn't yours, make it so it is. There's lots of ways you can do that. Obviously, talk to Darren is my number one piece of advice, but the first thing is to fix that problem. Because if you're gonna put marketing spend, which is fantastic, I think one thing that COVID's done is it's shifted people's mindsets to realise there are other ways to acquire clients and candidates through marketing. People have embraced marketing more than ever. But what we don't want is a leaky bucket. The same way you don't want that in your sales pipeline, you don't want it in your marketing pipeline either. So I think what we've done is we've done the right thing as an industry. We've embraced different ways to get candidate acquisition, but we've got to actually see through the entire funnel, look at the candidate experience, and make sure that we're keeping them within our own funnel, not sending them onto other job boards, which is, unfortunately, I see it more regularly than I'd like to. It feels like, especially on sharing the social posts. So it's one thing putting them on your website. The other thing is if you want to promote a job, you pay, you mentioned CV Library, so let's use them. We're not picking on them, but let's use CV Library as an example. You pay CV Library money every single month to advertise jobs. What you then do is you take that link to the job on CV Library, you put it onto your LinkedIn profile that's got, say, 5,000 connections within your industry, and you promote the CV Library job amongst your connections that you've already got access to, so that you can measure the ROI of that job and say that you've got an application from CV Library. So just that's how mental it is. These people live in your network, you've nurtured the relationship, and you pay CV Library so that they can say they got you that applicant. They're already in your network. It's the same thing where we say you don't search your CRM first. You need to go to your LinkedIn network, utilize it, drive people back to your funnel, because the ROI there is from your own marketing. It's not from your CV Library spend or your job board spend.
And just to add to that, Darren, you've also got to remember that if you are doing that, even if they do apply for the job and they're coming back to you, right, as opposed to going back to the job board and looking at other people's jobs, the CV that has gone through the application to come back to you is then also stored on the job board's CV database, right? So you've gone out as a recruiter and you've marketed your vacancy that's on CV Library across your social channels. You've then got the application back from somebody within your network but you've also given that CV to everybody that subscribes to the CV database within whatever job board it is, right? So you're literally using your brand assets and your marketing capability to give those CVs to other recruiters. I find
that you shifted them from being a passive candidate to being an active candidate for the rest of the market. So you've got the ability to have that passive candidate, the thing we all want, right? The people that other people don't have access to. But by following that marketing flow, you've shifted them from passive to active for the rest of the market to go after. It's crazy.
It is, and I think the way to resolve that is, and I always think from a marketing standpoint, and I speak to recruitment marketers all day, every day, as you, Darren, is your website should be the hub for every bit of engagement that you're trying to gain, whether it's client or candidate. So when you've got a team of recruiters that are actively going out there looking for candidates, the marketing function within your recruitment business should be absolutely instilling into the sales team to be driving the traffic back from their networks directly back into their own website, directly back into the website. Because if they can get engagement within your website, not only does it kick off an automation channel, but you're getting potentially exclusivity of the candidate if you get there quicker. Now, if you can turn your website into that real core candidate attraction tool, and then by using all of the additional support services that sit around your website, from SEO, from Pager, and all of the the great tools that are available, and you can start to pull everything into it, all of a sudden your job board is actually vastly more attractive than posting a job on any job board. Because you get a candidate through to your website, the likelihood is you stand the chance of having that candidate with a little bit more exclusivity than you would do if you got it from a job board, right? So this is why I think people should be so much heavier in, the stuff that goes on around their website, as much as their own website, obviously, but the stuff that goes on around their website, and the tools like Pager are invaluable for this. And I generally feel that is the holy grail of what recruitment businesses should be looking at. I know a lot of recruitment marketers know this, but it's about getting that education up to the rest of the board as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about reliance as a business. What we became was reliant on job boards, if you think about it. And one thing I think COVID's taught me as a business owner, at least, is that you can't be reliant on one channel for revenue. That you need to be a bit more diverse as a business. It's really hit home that. So we've obviously done a lot of product development, but for me, if you look inside recruitment agencies, it's about making sure that your website, something that you're in control of, is your source of leads, is your source of candidates as much as possible, because you don't want to be reliant on a third-party business, because that's not a good place to be. That's the reality. And what we found was, if you go back 6, 12 months, it was a very candidate-driven market. So actually, that job board spend was just, no, we've got to keep them, we've got to keep them. Where actually now that people are inspecting their budgets more, I think that question comes up a bit more, and you need to be saying to yourself, we've got this website, we're investing in this website, it's our primary marketing asset. It should be at the forefront of everything you do, and then you need to make sure everything around it plugs in. But I guess that leads us on to the question of ROI and measuring that. Because if you've got this asset in the middle, what you don't want to do is chuck money at it and not actually know which channel is working effectively. So, I mean, you're the expert here. How do you make sure you measure that effectively?
Well, first of all, it's ensuring that there's a way of tracking source codes into the business. Now, one of the challenges that, again, every recruitment organisation has is the consultants within the business, when they receive a candidate, is choosing it as self-gen or picking the top item on the list. Now, why is that bad for the actual consultant who's actually causing themselves their own problem here? Because if you think, if a candidate's putting it down as self-gen or putting it down as, I don't know, wherever they've got it from, LinkedIn or whatever they've got it from, and they're choosing the top one on the list, when it comes to getting budgets for the other things available to them to drive candidate acquisition, so let's say they were spending money on certain things to drive traffic into the website, or they're paying the marketing team spending money on certain things that's driving that candidate engagement, but the consultants are putting it down as self-gen. The consultants are putting it down as the top on the list. What happens then is, because you can't realize it when you make a placement, the budget for things that are working but aren't perceived to be working because they're being wrongly inputted into a system, it starts to get removed. Then all of a sudden, when you start to remove these things and you find out then that you're not generating as much revenue as you were, you start to think, well, it's sort of a lesser of two evils. It's sort of them causing their own problems. It's consultants causing their own problems. So I think source code tracking and effective source code tracking not only helps the consultants generate more revenue, because it's so important that you continue to invest in the right things. And if they're choosing the wrong things, you're going to end up with a problem, right? But I also think when it gets down to your own website and looking at source codes, we shouldn't just be source code tracking things that are saying website, our website. It's come from our website. We should be looking at the journey prior to our website. We should be looking at things like, has it come from Pager? Has it come from LinkedIn? Has it come from Twitter? Has it come from Facebook? Has it come from Google for Jobs? Has it come from Indeed? Has it come from PPC? Or whatever channel is driving the candidate into the website, before that candidate finds its way onto the CRM, that's the source code that we should really be looking at, prefixed by the website name. So, like LinkedIn/volcanic, hopefully, or and I think if you start to get this right, and you truly start to get this right, when you run your placement reports, and the board are running their placement reports, and they're looking at the spend to attract candidates, so they're looking at the cost to attract candidates, where the candidate sources are coming from placement, all of a sudden they've actually got a very, very, very clear view. And not only does that allow them to, or your team to look at sort of saying, well, we need to invest more time in this because this is really working. We can start to reduce time on this because this isn't working. And we're starting to free up more time for you to do other activities as a recruitment marketing team, right? Mm. Now, in addition to that, I think that when it gets, if we can start to automate that, and we can, so we could tell you Volcanic can, and certainly isn't a Volcanic pitch, but you should be looking at your user. If you can start to automate that, and you can start to get that data delivered directly back into your CRM and through integration, we can then start to take that problem away from the consultants. But at the same time, you're responsible for this. If you own the budget for those tools, you should be screaming out to your sales floor to make sure this is done properly. If you haven't got an automation set in place for integration,
yeah. But it's the problem. Like whichever you put in a form on a website, let's forget recruitment for a second. Any website where it says, "How did you hear about us?" and you look at the list and it says Google, and I think sometimes Ask Jeeves is still on there. It's that's how out of date it is. You're like, Ask Jeeves, yeah, that's where I heard of you. I'm going to click that one. It means that your data is nonsense. And if you're trying to make data-driven decisions, your data has to be good. So I'm with you. Source code tracking is a good first step. What I'd love to, my holy grail is first touch attribution, right? Because everyone plans a marketing journey that is going to be very straightforward, one line. They see a LinkedIn advert, they click on that, they then go to the About Us page, they like what we do, they go to the jobs, they fill in the job application. They think the journey is one line, but normally what happens is they see an advert on LinkedIn, they go and make a cup of tea, they come back, they scroll down again, then 2 days later they listen to a podcast, you get mentioned, they go to your company page. So what you really want to know is they heard of us 2 days ago, then they listen to the podcast, then they view the company page 2 weeks later, and then they signed up for job alerts, and then from a job alert they went through. Knowing that entire journey is really key, because what you may end up doing is saying it was a job alert that gave you that placement. But actually what you missed is the fact they listened to your podcast and they saw your LinkedIn advert before they were familiar with your brand. So first touch attribution for me is the holy grail.
This is a conversation that can go on all day. It's sort of omni-channel, isn't it? But I always think where you've got 4 or 5 different channels, which one are you going to actually allocate the revenue to? Do you split it evenly across all of those channels? I think it's a really difficult, it is the holy grail if you understood it all, but how do you then allocate revenue to them? Is it a case that because they've touched 4 points, we break it down in 25% chunks? But yet what drove the conversion, is that more important than maybe what drove the original view? But perhaps, I
think the key is consistency, right? As long as whatever measurement you do consistently, it should mean that your results are the same. So what we normally do is first touch attribution. Whatever was our first touch is what we're going to dedicate that revenue to mainly. Now we still look at the others, but mainly that revenue goes to the first touch. But what happens is the podcast could be the first touch. This could be the first touch. And as long as you keep that consistent in your reporting, at least your data is consistent, and then you can make decisions off the back of it.
True. But then if you just look at, we keep talking about this, like I said, but if you're just looking at the first touch, you don't know about the second to the third or the fourth touch, and you're not reporting on that as a revenue generator, perhaps you stop doing those elements, right? And this is where
it's difficult. It's difficult. We still report on them, and I'm talking about Pager now. I'm not talking about for jobs, right? But we still report on them in terms of we measure how many people did these things. But when we come to actually putting our customer acquisition cost, it goes to the first touch, because we think the start of the journey is almost the most important. Where did they start? Yeah, I mean, we could go on all day about it. I don't think there is a right answer, but the one thing I know is you need to be measuring it, and you can't rely on human beings to enter the right information. I mean, that's what we all agree on.
Yeah, and you definitely can't rely on salespeople to enter the right information. And you know, we're all guilty. We're all bad. We're all bad at admin, and you know, path of least resistance. And this is where, when you can automate that process, you know, you're going to see that you're going to get greater results, and greater results for the people that are actually using the services anyway. So, okay, for risk of talking about this topic for too long, I know one of the things that's very sort of high on your set of skills, Darren, is personal branding across LinkedIn. And you do this an awful lot with Pager. And I think when we had a conversation previously, you actually attribute quite a bit of the growth of Pager to personal brand, and you building personal brand, and the other guys within your team building personal brand. Talk to me about this for a recruitment consultant or a recruitment business. So, yeah.
So, I mean, the biggest thing for me is personal brand is such a hot topic right now, and everybody thinks they need to be the number one recruiter in personal brand. You don't, just to be clear. Like, we've already gone through the process of removing the idea of a generalist recruiter. You know, for me, generalist doesn't work. You need to be niche. And by niche, I mean, maybe you specialize in IT, but what I'd actually rather that be is I specialize in IT, Python recruitment, and only data scientists in London. That's something that you can own a niche on, because actually now I want to talk about machine learning. I want to be talking to people within that space, you know, Python developers in London. Maybe they can appear on my podcast. Suddenly you've got a real niche that you can own, and you don't need to be known as an expert in machine learning recruitment in London. You know, that's not possible for you to be a machine learning expert, right? We don't expect you to be. What we want you to be is the idea that you know about the recruitment in that space, what the salary should be, what's the market like. That's what you can talk about on LinkedIn to create conversations. So if you look at a typical recruiter profile on LinkedIn, typically it's, I've got a job, I'm hiring for X, I'm hiring for Y, and it's very, very short term. My biggest thing, and it comes back to actually the job boards, what we started at the start. If you place somebody today, right now, we just move on straight away. We forget about that relationship. We've almost got our placement fee. We don't need them right now. Again, right? They sit in the database, they go stale. When actually what you want to do is nurture that relationship throughout your lifetime with them. Share valuable content on LinkedIn. Obviously share jobs, but nurture that relationship. Share content every single week. So the next time that candidate is having a bad commute, hopefully in the future, a bad stand-up, a tech stand-up, they don't go, right, I'm going to go to CV Library, I'm going to go to Indeed. They say, right, I'm going to go back to Darren at X Recruitment because he really looked after me last time. I tell you what, he knows his stuff because I've stayed connected to him on LinkedIn. He gets my space. I trust him with my career. So what I'm going to do is go back to Darren rather than go to Indeed. So you're getting repeat business with candidates as well as clients that way. So if you think of LinkedIn right now as just somewhere to advertise jobs, the missed opportunities absolutely huge. Like, I can't stress this enough. Like, I haven't done a single cold call in the last year, but we've had record new business, right? That's where I sit. I just sit on LinkedIn, I post content, I create conversations. That leads to conversations on the phone. The phone does come into it for me, but it's much further down the line. Don't get me wrong, we've got salespeople that hit the phones as well. But for me personally, I find LinkedIn is a tremendous door opener. If you're not utilizing it right now, it's the biggest missed opportunity, I would say, of this year. That's a bold statement to say, but that's what I'm going to stick with.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, I mean, you've sort of absolutely hit the nail on the head and how important it is nowadays. But one of the things that gets me still, I think, for the use of LinkedIn is seeing consultants that post videos that aren't particularly engaging. It could be a bit of a put-off. So you've really got to know your onions, haven't you, before you start to approach this type of manner of sort of internal engagement, inbound engagement. Interestingly, one of the things that we used to find is recruitment businesses actually being very protective of their recruitment consultants and almost not wanting them to build personal brands. I mean, we've had instances where we built sites, even for some of the biggest of recruiters, and they didn't want consultant profile pages or searchable consultant profile database. because they felt it would attract headhunters in the same way that personal brand is obviously going to attract headhunters. And my argument to them was, well, when we start looking at building out consultant landing pages, consultant hero pages on the site, it's generating new pages to the website. It's generating pages to the website. If someone was to search based upon your personal brand within LinkedIn, they could be directed back to the website and engaging with the website as opposed to engaging within LinkedIn, right? But yet, I think that the challenge for a recruitment business isn't to stop people from having a personal brand. It's not to stop them from having a profile on the website for the fear that they're going to get headhunted. It's actually to stop them leaving. That is their job, right? You really want all of your staff to be headhunted because it means they're doing a bloody good job.
They're doing fantastic.
If you're concerned about your own retention of staff, I think you've got a bigger problem. Because of them building personal brands, I think you've got a bigger problem than,
Completely, and it's the same as would you offer them training, right? So if they're even down to the way you prospect, earning retained business. If you train them, they might take that and they might start their own business and use it for it. But that's the worst case scenario. Actually, it's not the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is they stay with you, they don't do any retained business, they perform way below average because you don't invest in them. So you've got kind of two worst case scenarios there, and both of them, actually, I'd rather someone leave, after 5 years of making me a significant amount of money than being average and just plodding along and me question each month whether I should keep them or not. That's not what you want. You want to invest in people, and personal brand is a sales tool. Let's be really frank. Now, you shouldn't use it to directly sell, but it's a sales tool. It opens up conversations, which then leads to revenue. So if you want to create more top billers, people that are going to perform better, we're moving on now. If you think about people coming to the market, the grads, the idea of them hitting the phones probably doesn't appeal to them, but they're more comfortable with video. They're more comfortable putting out media content, podcasts. So actually, they'll be the ones that take to it like a duck to water. Whereas your old school recruiters can carry on as they are, but what we're seeing is a new breed of salespeople, not just in recruitment, everywhere in B2B. So for me, it's about embracing it early, because if you're worried about people leaving, your competitors might not be, so they're going to be the ones doing these things. So what we're seeing is fantastic returns. Like we know we've got lots of mutual clients. Typically, the people that embrace personal brands see an increase of around 10% of website traffic. That's more leads, more candidates coming to the website that you can then convert. So you've got two very different views on it. Your long-term view is you're going to increase revenue. Yes, they may leave, but that could happen anyway. Your short-term view is, you get to keep them, but they might underperform. I know which one I prefer.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Especially, I've got a bit of a question for you on this, Darren. So where do you start with generating a personal brand on LinkedIn? So, I mean, you've sort of done it from your own experience with Pager. Where did you start? Where did you start thinking, right, this is how I'm going to do it, and this is what I'm going to do? What was your very first one?
So the first thing that you want to do is get out your sales playbook. I'm hoping we've all got these now. This is why people buy from us. This is why people don't buy from us. And the bit that I'm interested in is the objections page. I want you to give me your top 5 objections, reasons people don't work with you. And I want you to own them. And the content you put out to LinkedIn will be about your objections. If people often say to you, this is the reason we can't buy, I'm going to take Volcanic, for example. I'm going to assume I know some of your objections. We can't invest in Volcanic because we've got our job board spend over here. Well, then your social post should talk about the fact that actually you don't need to have your job board spend quite as high once you've got a website that performs for you. Now, you're not talking about buying Volcanic at that point. You're talking about having a performing website. So you take your objections, you own them, and you use them for social content. What that does is it allows you to nurture those relationships. So as I said before, you've got, say, 5,000 connections you're connected to. If you look, they're seeing your posts every single day. Every time they get up in the morning, they check LinkedIn on their phone. And what you're doing is you're reminding them about why they should buy your service in a roundabout way. So when you actually have a sales conversation with them, they're not going to mention that objection because actually you've already covered that 2 weeks ago in a social post they saw. So you're bringing your sales process to a shorter sales cycle by using your personal brand. So the place to start, sorry, a long-winded way of saying it, is what are your objections for your sales? That is what can drive a personal brand.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the same, I guess, for Volcanic and for Pages. It would be for a recruitment business. I mean, recruitment businesses get objections all the time, right? One of the biggest ones, we don't use recruitment agencies. We want to source ourselves, or we've got a PSL or something along those lines. So I suppose it's coming up with objection handling slightly different. we were.
But if you think about the machine learning in Python, right? So you can talk about the fact that machine learning specialists in Python in London are such a rarity, scarcity. You can give some stats about that. And you can talk about the fact you don't want to use agencies. Well, that means that actually you're going to get access to 1% of them. But actually our database, we know for a fact we've got this many people in there, which if we look at the skill set on LinkedIn Insights is actually 50% of that market space. So if you want access to 50% of the market space overnight, you should be using an agency. That's the sort of content that will drive engagement and open up conversations.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. I think what's next on the topic is the integrations. And how sort of that can do a lot of manual lifting for a recruitment business. And we already talked about sort of source code integration tracking. So what's your sort of stance on integrations, Darren? So obviously, you've got to have integrations with various different web products. But what's your sort of take on sort of this whole integration sort of ecosystem amongst a recruiter's tech stack?
It's interesting, isn't it? So, I mean, obviously, I was at Broadbean for 10 years. I was on the tech side, and I actually managed their integration team. So I oversaw, I think in the end, it was around 6,000 job board integrations. And that was, for a long time, was let's integrate. And as we've seen that consolidation in the market, actually, it's about quality rather than quantity, right? But for a long time, it was how many things can you integrate with? So actually, I think we need to concentrate on the quality part when it comes to integration. So quite often when you look at tech suppliers, they've got these huge marketplaces, right? And that can be like a carrot in front of you, and you're like, right, this is the one for us. When actually you need to look and say, right, what problem are you trying to solve, and can they talk to each other? And if they can, that's fantastic, because your CRM needs to be your central point. We've said that about the reporting. Everything needs to sit, and the CRM needs to be your central point. Any peripherals you have around that, they need to talk to each other. I don't believe now, in the year we're in, that pieces of tech can't talk to each other. If they don't have API access, or they're not willing to integrate, that's a bit of a problem with that supplier. And I would personally at that point be looking elsewhere. In my own view, everything I do within my own business talks to each other. So if you think about in marketing, what I've seen too much is that marketers spend, I want to say, around 40% of their time producing reports to prove what they're doing works, even though they know it works, which frustrates the hell out of me, right? And it's largely because the systems don't talk to each other. So they're taking spreadsheet dumps from here, putting them into Google Data Studio, taking that from over here. What we want is just something that talks to each other. Your flow is all connected. So there's lots of tools out there, and recruitment for me, especially in the UK market, is fantastic because you do have a real good tech marketplace where we all work together. The good companies work together and can really drive the ROI of each other. I really can. So if you've got a decent CRM in the middle, most of the peripherals will talk to each other. And for me, that is absolutely key. And I've learned that over a decade of bringing tech products together. The good ones can talk to each other.
It's also working out the workflow, because you get a lot of questions about, can you integrate with this? Can you integrate with that? But there's a lot of things that sometimes you don't necessarily need to. There's times where you don't necessarily need to, because one of their other systems can actually take the integration. All you may need to do is link out to it. So I think when you look at integrations, it's good to have a clear idea about how it works, how everything comes together, rather than just saying, well, we use X, Y, and Z, and we need to have it all integrated. So
absolutely. I mean, the best example of that is we don't integrate with a CRM. What we do is we integrate, we're a layer above, because what we do is drive that website traffic. So we integrate with Volcanic. That's what we do. There's no point of us directly integrating with, and you pass it on, right? Because that's the workflow. Whereas during sales conversations, we're asked all the time, does it plug into Bullhorn, Vincere, Job Adder? It goes on. The answer is no, it doesn't, and it doesn't need to, because we've worked out the workflow, and we sit here, they sit there, your website provider sits there. And as much as I said, the CRM should be central. If you take one step further away, what's central is your website. Everything should be going through your website as your central piece. I feel like I'm selling Volcanic now, but it's your CRM is central to your business. Once you zoom in on the marketing bit, everything should drive through your website, because that is the key. If you don't do that, what you're going to do is end up with data everywhere, and suddenly your marketer is spending 40% of the time doing reporting, and not when they could be spending 40% of the time writing white paper, salary surveys, blog posts, things that are actually going to drive you more candidates and leads.
And I think it's also important to understand why you want an integration in the first place as well. You know, we get questions about, can we integrate with X? Can we integrate with Y? Why do you need to integrate with them? You know, what are you trying to achieve, and what other tools have you got that could bridge the gap of an integration if it's not a supportive one? So, you know, Broadbean and Budget Melody Deboo, sorry mate, but, you know, they all provide a service where you can get a level of integration from CRM to posting your website at the same time posting to job boards, with applicant tracking coming back into the yes, no, maybe flagging system coming back into CRM. So you can get a level of integration even if the provider doesn't have, you know, with CRM, even if the provider doesn't have a supported full turnkey CRM integration. Well, you should be able to anyway, so long as the CRM integrates with one of the vacancy distribution tools, and the vacancy distribution tool will integrate with your website provider, right? So I think it's understanding exactly what you're trying to achieve. Is it just job posts? Is it applications back? This is from a web volcanic centric. Or do you want to sync candidate portal data? So candidates can log in, they can review the data is automatically synced with the CRM, and then when they do stuff in the CRM, it can automatically be synced back into the candidate portal. It depends upon your type of business and trying to optimize the workflows as best as possible.
Yeah, I mean, the candidate data is an interesting one, right? Because GDPR has changed that. It used to be, yeah, as long as some of it's there, some of it's there. Now you need to make sure that's tightly integrated. So if somebody does a right to be forgotten or a deletion request, it actually gets deleted everywhere. And for me, integration is the key to that. You don't want data sitting around in different places. You need to know where it is at all times.
Absolutely right. Yeah, and this leads us quite nicely into sort of talking about the bundle offer we've put together. So both Pager and Volcanic now have an offer for any new clients that aren't a Volcanic client or aren't a current Pager client, to be able to get a bundled solution between us and Pager at a sort of a bundled cost point as well. So it'd be worth, if there's anybody on this webinar that would be interested in reaching out to hear about it, you know, either reach out to the Volcanic sales team or, you know, the Pager sales team, and somebody will be more than happy to walk you through that. Other than that, I think we're at about half an hour, so I suppose I'll just say thank you very much to Darren for coming on, and thank you very, very much to everybody that logged on today. We've got, I suppose, a couple of questions, if anybody wants to send a couple of questions through. Sorry, I was about to wrap up a bit too soon, but if there's any questions. There is one actually. How's it best to analyse job board spend, which I think we sort of covered off a little bit. So it goes, analysing job board spend, I think you've not got to look at the application rates, you've got to look at the placement rates. Now, this goes back again to effective source code cracking. So if you're not tracking where your candidates are coming from, you're not truly going to be able to analyse the job board spend. And if you can't analyse the job board spend, how do you keep getting the budget to be able to use it, right? So that goes back to something that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add on that is also check, did you know them before? Are they new candidates? Because quite often we say, this is great, you know, if it's already in the CRM or if they're in your LinkedIn network, actually, can you attribute it back to that job board, or should you have been doing more email marketing? Should you have been driving your candidates out of your database better? It's a good question to ask once you know it.
Yeah, totally agree. Right, well, that's it. I think we've run over time. So thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Darren, for joining. Like I said before, this will be recorded, so you'll be able to watch it back if needs be. If you really wanted to listen to us for another 35 minutes. Other than that, thank you very much.